Good morning. Welcome to Tip Off for the Wednesday before trade deadline, live from Phoenix, or not live, but you understand. I'm going to do a really, really short version today um, because I think that, frankly, unless you listen to this really early, things could have changed, and I don't want to waste everyone's time. And moreover, I think I've got a world of content up there for you. I'll try to embed the vocal chat as well if you didn't catch that on the site. We've got podcasts for you coming up with Kevin Pelton today. We had a great bracket podcast with Walt Perrin and Kevin Pelton. I hope you got that. Alan Horton and I did a podcast. There's a lot of stuff. Let me quickly address yesterday's tip off. I'm not sure my message got across. Uh, Maybe in the simplest term. My message is part of being a fan is enjoying the team. I'm not sure I disagree with anyone who thinks that the young kids should be playing more. I've been on the forefront of that the whole time. But it seems to me that with 25 games left, that argument seems to be over, and that we're wasting our breath after every game if we're just going to complain that the young guys should have played more. I'm not saying it's an illegitimate argument. I'm just saying why don't we enjoy the run? That somehow miraculously a team that I never thought would possibly ever be in the middle of a playoff run is in fact in a playoff run with enormous games tonight and enormous games tomorrow, and then playing the Warriors, who will, in theory, be worse. Though I'm not convinced of it without Monte, and the Lakers likely without Al for those two games. So that was my point. I think it got misconstrued, or I just did a terrible job of saying it. There's a great quote out there that um, it's what you miss. It's not that I said it, it's you misunderstood. But I think this might be a case where I didn't do as good a job as I needed to making it clear. All right, let's just fire through where we stand as of 7:30 your time, 6:30 my time in Phoenix, Arizona. The Warriors have made a trade. It's terrible news for the Utah Jazz. Um, One of the unique things about being able to trade with the New Jersey Nets was there's an NBA rule that says you cannot trade your back-to-back first-round picks. So the Jazz couldn't get two first-round picks when trading for Darren, but they were able to do it with New Jersey because New Jersey held this pick that had Warrior protection on it. The protection is the top seven. If the Warriors after the lottery end up in the top seven picks, 1 through 7, the Warriors keep their pick. Yesterday, the Golden State Warriors basically pulled the plug on their season. I love how everybody says this because Monte Ellis actually doesn't help you win. He just scores a lot of points. But it's still, I think, the premise of what they're doing. They may turn out to actually, if Steven Jackson's not going to play, you might be surprised. Epe Udo they'll miss, but you might be surprised how, and this might turn out to be a real point for me to be able to hang on here for a while, because I have been preaching. Yes, not talking, preaching, I will admit. Pontificating, being quite obnoxious about my desire for players that use possessions above the league average. To some extent, what the Warriors did yesterday is they removed 30 below league average possessions, and if they move them to somebody other than Nate Robinson, which is maybe where they're moving them, and Darrell Wright and Klay Thompson and David Lee and Andres Biedrins and Stephen Curry and Brandon Rush get those possessions, I would actually argue they become a better team, and since Monte was a terrible defensive team. But the premise still here is there's also a real chance the Warriors are going to shut down Steph Curry from the quick conversations I had with people last night. And so what we have is that the Warriors, who are currently, I think, sitting ninth as the ninth worst record, could very easily slide. And then the Jazz do not get that pick until next year, when it's protected top 6, and if they don't get it that year, they don't ever get it. It becomes a second round pick. So that was not a good day for the Jazz. There are numerous rumors out there involving the Jazz, which is interesting because they aren't usually out there, and they all make sense. To my point of yesterday. I mean, it's interesting that these rumors go, and 90% of the reaction on Twitter is negative to every single one of these trades, and yet I would argue they're everything that everybody on Twitter has been asking for all year. Let me address the premise of what Kevin O'Connor can do. Anytime a general manager gets into a trade deadline, they have to have some understanding of what they can do. What Kevin can do is take C.J. Miles' expiring contract and trade it for a player who has more than 1 year on his deal. So if somebody has a player that Kevin likes, thinks would be useful to the Jazz, um, who has a year or two or three or maybe even four left on their deal, he could trade CJ's contract for it. He cannot trade CJ to someone at this point because they think CJ is going to be a great asset for them. I don't think. Raja is a different case, and Raja is going to be hard to move because Raja has $3.5 million on his contract for next year. And there were rumors that the Jazz got into conversations with the Clippers, which makes sense. The Clippers want a big two that can help defend. Raja kind of fits into that mold, but they don't want to deal with the $3.5 million on Raja's contract next year. The Jazz, in exchange, they have a trade exception you could take, or the Jazz could just take somebody off their roster that they don't really interested in. That one's interesting because you almost wonder if the Jazz would come back. We're going to find out how badly the Jazz, how we're going to find out the situation with Raja and where it stands by the end of this trade deadline. Because if the Jazz want to just move him, they could just. I kind of think if I'm surprised there's some interest. If there's somebody with interest, then here's Raja. We pay the end of this year's contract. You can have him for the rest of the year. Who knows what that would be. Josh Howard's name has circulated. That makes sense because Josh Howard is actually playing decently. It would probably be a good seventh or eighth man for a team. He's been mentioned around the Spurs, which again makes sense because of the fact that they have Manu Ginobili's injuries, but he's also shooting 40%. So let's not overvalue who Josh Howard is. And the issue with Josh Howard becomes, I think, from a Jazz standpoint, looking ahead, do we think we're really going to re-sign him? Do we want to re-sign him in the offseason? And do we think we could re-sign him in the offseason? I think Josh is going to go wherever he gets the most money and don't think he particularly has any ties here. But he's smart enough to say that he'd be willing to come back because it's a place to play. And the Jazz have to figure out if they can take that asset, which they paid near the league minimum for a year and are getting incredible value out considering what they're paying him, if they can parlay that into something else that has some long-term value, or whether just moving on is the best. Other than that, there aren't a huge amount of pieces for the Jazz to be playing around with. As I've talked about extensively, I think both Jefferson or Millsap, which I'm not sure I see the Jazz moving yet, but if they do, I think both of them have a larger value to the Jazz at the trade deadline, at draft time than they do right now. So that's where we stand on stuff. That's kind of what we can do. I think everyone's sitting around waiting for Dwight a tiny bit still. I wrote something up on kind of an empty knock-in of the trade deadline. I may do this. I probably won't do the same tonight because we play, and then Thursday I'll jump back into the trade deadline. Feel free to read it, but I think it's an interesting retro on why we traded Darren, what's going on in Orlando. They are really screwed right now. All right, that's kind of the breakdown. I don't have a lot. I've written a lot of stuff. I think most of the stuff is there for you. So I'm just going to give you short, sweet, simple. That's where we are. That's where we stand. I did write a piece on Locked On Jazz about the Jazz flexibility long-term and what that might be able to allow them to do. And I'm not sure whether that's something they would do. But the concept there is if you know in 3 years that Gordon's earning 3.4 and Burks is earning 2.3, you could suddenly add an overpriced third wing who may be earning 7, 8, or 9 million because the idea of only paying your wings 13, 14 million is actually a pretty good number for you. And there were 4 players that were involved there. They were Marvin Williams, Sean Marion, Jason Richardson, and Wesley Matthews, who Jason's old, and so he's on the back end of that deal. But they all could be possibly available as a cost-cutting measure by another team. The Anthony Morrow rumor with C.J. Miles fits into that whole idea of C.J. for a player with money back. All the rumors that we've heard actually so far make sense, and all of the rumors that have been out there, if the trade were made, I would say, okay, I got it, understand. There's nothing crazy out there or that doesn't make sense. I'd say there's some validity probably to what the Jazz are talking about. Okay, thumbs up. I'll keep you up to date on Locked On Jazz throughout the day, and on Twitter at Locked On Sports, and on Facebook at Locked On Sports. Have a good one.